Hello everybody and welcome to He Said, She Said. We're glad you dropped by to check in to see what's going on here around the property. Today's episode is going to focus on part 2 of my miter saw station build. If you missed part 1, I'll be sure to put a link to that episode in the description. So the primary focus of today's episode is the worktops, extension benches located to the left and the right of the miter saw itself. All right, so that's the plan. Let's get to it. All right, so the frames are done. They are assembled and sitting over in their temporary home. And right now they're freestanding as two independent left and right halves. Right now we're standing at the back of it. Where the saw will eventually sit is this spot right here in the middle. And the saw will be facing that direction. And that'll be one of the last things that we do is build. There'll be one more aluminum frame that will support a shelf that the saw will sit on. We'll be able to precision place the height of that shelf so that the deck of the saw is just dead even with the very top. So you have one continuous surface from left outfeed to right outfeed right across the deck of the saw. As I mentioned, that's pretty much the last thing we'll install. But in addition to the shelf that holds the saw itself, there'll probably be another shelf partway down just to add some stability and rigidity to tying these two halves of the bench together. The very next thing we are going to do, however, is build the tops. And those are work surfaces that will sit actually just dead even with the extrusion material itself and go and fill in all of this empty space here in the middle. So I get to move from working with metals to my old friend wood. And so with this 1.1/8" plywood, that might seem overkill in one sense, but I intentionally went with that because I want to add some weight to this bench. It's aluminum, and yeah, with all those pieces erector setted together, it's fairly heavy, but I really want to add some extra mass to this thing so it's nice and stable. Not just for miter saw cutting operations, but for the clamping table function that it will also serve. So that's the next step, is cutting this bad boy down to size. In order to tame this big old sheet of plywood, I'm just laying out some pencil marks to begin with. And then I'll use my straight edge clamp and circular saw to actually make the cuts. So that small scrap of wood I'm shoving around the table, that's a little spacer block that helps me line up the straight edge clamp correctly. The secret behind that little block of wood is it's the same width as the distance from the edge of the shoe of the circular saw over to the blade. That's how I get the placement of that straight edge guide correct every time. The main goal for right now is to get two long skinny pieces to make the work surfaces for the extension tables on the miter saw bench. I'll worry about sizing down this other piece later on, once I actually know what the dimensions need to be for the other surface that the miter saw itself will actually sit on. I think when the project is all done, I'm going to want to do a feature by feature walk around, but for now, I want to point out one little feature that I've already added. You see that slot there on the green shelf? I put that there for the express purpose of doing this. Storing my circular saw.
The cuts I've made so far have left these pieces oversized by just a little bit, and that's intentional. I need a measurement here for the table saw setup so I can rip these pieces down to the correct width. So this funny little cutout I'm doing here with the jigsaw might look weird at first, but it'll make sense later on why I'm adding this profile to one end of both of the extension tables. Speaking of features that I want to include in my final walk around when this project is all done, I mentioned that we'd have that clamping table functionality. Well, before this thing is even done, I get to use that feature right here. There's some little bits that the jigsaw didn't quite take out that I need to get at with a chisel, and clamping this board like this puts that at the proper working height for me to take care of that. I am really going to love having this feature going forward. The next thing that I want to do is edge band the plywood with hardwood. So to set up my table saw for ripping down that hardwood, I need to know the thickness here of the plywood. Alright, so we've got the worktops cut to size. I've done some end profile cuts where the work surface will actually meet the deck of the miter saw itself. And I've also edge banded everything in some maple that I had around. And actually, if I had it to do over again, I would probably skip the maple and just leave the raw plywood edge. The reason being is the worktop will actually sit dead flush to that metal frame that'll go all the way around the perimeter of this. So there's not much of the edge of the plywood that'll actually be exposed and take much of a beating. The only thing that's going to take any kind of a beating at all is that special cutout area that I made that will meet right up with the deck of the saw. That will be out in the breeze and not protected, but even at that, probably won't take much of a beating. A couple coats of polyurethane, something like that, to ruggedize it a little bit, probably would have been sufficient. But I didn't think of that soon enough, so I've got this lovely maple wrap around the perimeter of everything. So given that that's what I've done with the edge of the worktop, a little sanding is in order. I just want to make sure that the top of this is dead flush with the rest of it, because I'll be skinning the top of this with Formica, and you don't want to have any air trapped in there, which is what would happen if there was any sort of height difference, even a small one, between the two types of material. So the sanding is going to help me bring that flush, make the contact cement process go smoothly, and also I'm just sanding down the filler that I used to fill in some of the voids. A product I discovered that I like to use for filler is something called water putty. It's like Durham's rock hard water putty, especially for something that doesn't show, something you're not going to stain, something that doesn't need to match the wood around it. It's very stable, and yes, dries rock hard and makes a great filler for something like this. I just love the smell of contact cement in the morning, don't you? So this step is all about starting in the center and working your way out towards the edges to try to take out air bubbles. So I'm set up right now to support these work surfaces in a very temporary way, just to check them for fit and plan my next move. I've been kind of engineering this thing as I go along. So the next thing that needs to happen is work out a way to permanently support these worktops from underneath, and then also to shim them up so that the worktop is flush and dead even with the aluminum frame perimeter around it. All right, so we'll be picking it up right there with the next episode of supporting those worktops from underneath and figuring out a permanent way to do that. Everything came together pretty nice with the worktops. They fit in there just like they're supposed to, and it's really starting to take shape. So we've got one more episode, and I think we'll be able to finish everything out and get everything all leveled up and squared up and trued up. So we'll finish this project in episode 3, and I look forward to seeing you back here to see how it all comes out. Thank you so much for joining us here at He Said, She Shed, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.